Hello, everybody, and welcome to our January 2026 State of the Market discussion with our esteemed guest, Jonathan Miller. Jonathan is the publisher of the Element Market Reports nationwide. We rely on him for all of our data. He's also the CEO of Miller Samuels, a real estate appraisal company, and he also teaches at Columbia Graduate School market analysis to the students there. Jonathan, we're so excited to have you.
Oh, it's always fun to chat with you guys.
We're starting off 2026 with so much in the news that we're watching. How are you finding the market these days? What are you seeing?
So, to the consumer, it's a little confusing because there's a lot of macro news sort of swirling around and there's all sorts of uncertainty.
Right.
But if you sort of push that aside, if you're thinking about the New York City housing market right now, we're at a point where this market never was devoid of supply like a good part of the rest of the country coming out of the pandemic. And inventory levels, while they're lower than they have been in the last couple of years, they're not they haven't been, sort of eviscerated off the face of the earth like
Mm-hmm.
we had in other regions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that listing inventory tells the story more than any other housing metric right now. So if you think of regions of the country, the Northeast and the Midwest are very tight on supply. But if you look at the Sun Belt, like Texas and Florida,
Mm-hmm.
there's much more inventory
Mm.
and a little bit more than pre-pandemic levels. And then the West also has a little bit, it's sort of at par, a little bit higher than pre-pandemic. So the Midwest and the Northeast are, tight housing markets relative to the rest of the country. So there is no national housing market, but everybody talks like there is, like, oh, existing home sales went up, and it's like, localized knowledge is much more
Different parts
useful.
behave differently.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they have different economic drivers. I mean, there's some similarities, but it's what's happening in Austin, Texas, doesn't relate to what's happening in Manhattan. It's apples and oranges.
I've heard this buzzword about the Goldilocks moment that I've heard
Oh,
you say. What do you mean by the Goldilocks moment?
well, first of all, as a kid, I loved porridge or oatmeal, and I didn't like it too hot or too cold. And one of the way to think about inventory is when you think about supply. If you look at that national housing market, even though there's not a national market, it's an aggregation of thousands of markets.
Right.
Inventory levels are right now higher than they were during the pandemic, which there was very little inventory because I feel the Fed kept the rates or kept interest rates, not mortgage rates, too low for too long,
Mm-hmm.
which basically eliminated inventory off the face of the earth.
Mm.
And that made housing prices go higher. But on the other hand, certain markets like the Sun Belt and the Western U.S., uh, are higher inventory. And then if we just look at what U.S. inventory was before the pandemic, it was elevated.
Mm-hmm.
So we're sort of in the middle, and so I call that just right, sort of the Goldilocks reference. But it's just right in the context of the last decade of like we're a little bit lower than pre-pandemic and we're a little bit higher than pandemic
Mm-hmm.
right now.
Yeah, it's interesting because the inventory, like locally in Manhattan, seems like year over year, based on the last report, is it's a little lower, right? It's like
Yes,
4.4% off. I mean, but it's still. I mean, like, would you say it's within range? Like,
I'd say it's on the low end of normal. We're not devoid of supply,
mm-hmm.
and we don't have a surplus of supply. We're we're at the lower end of in between.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at 5,000, and I don't remember the exact number. Um, Normal is more like 7,500.
Mm-hmm.
So we are low relative to the long-term norm,
Mm-hmm.
but it's. I think the issue has been over the last couple of years is that we've had more inventory, but pricing has been wrong in terms of, you have people coming out of the pandemic and like, it was a total one-sided market where the sellers could pick their number, right? Because that's how it was because interest rates were so low. And I think that it's hard for them to let go of that sort of power in the deal. There's an anchoring for them to, they want to stay in control. And the buyer, is benefiting by a little bit more inventory that came in. Now we're having inventory fall in New York, which is counter to the national narrative where inventory has been flat to rising across the country, and here it's falling.
Oh, wow.
And that shows you how powerful the sales demand has been here. That this is, there's a lot of activity.
Right. I mean, you've seen that too.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of activities. So I'm just wondering if you could take us through a little bit of like the factors that make what you're calling the Goldilocks market, because, we're hearing a lot of, noise in the news and the media about factors that are quite concerning. And that's not what we're seeing translate to the market. Like, we're seeing a busy
Right.
market. So like a lot of the uncertainty that's being buzzed about is not translating
Gotcha.
into the market. So just wondering what you're seeing on your end.
Yeah, that's a great point because there's all this sort of confusion, national macroeconomic. Will the Fed cut rates? Is Wall Street a bubble? There's all the geopolitical things up in the air, and at the same time, we're seeing more sales. And I think the reason for that, part of it has been since the middle of or the first week in July, mortgage rates have fallen about 60 basis points. And while that's not, a massive drop, it's incrementally tips more and more people into the market or tips more and more listings into the market as the spread between someone that bought at 3%, 30-year fixed, is now looking to pay in the low sixes instead of 7%, right? You're not pulling everybody in, but you're pulling more people in. And then on top of it, you're stimulating more sales with lower rates. And then on top of it, we have a robust financial market, which some can argue is bubblicious. I think I don't know if that's a proper economic term, but the idea is that there is concern that it's so strong and high, but there's a lot of as you move higher in the sort of the wealth spectrum, higher net worth, higher income, higher price point you're looking at for a property, there's more sort of emphasis on the performance of the financial markets, like equity drawdowns to buy all cash. In fact, for the last couple of years, cash buyers have represented couple of quarters ago, it hit a record 70%. The long-term norm is 50%. This is a 50-50 market. But in the last couple of years, the more affluent have sort of navigated in ways to give them access to alternative financing, alternative products from Wall Street. And that's one of the reasons why the upper half of the market, the median is about one and change. So, a little bit over that, or the half above that is there's more sort of energy behind it than the lower half. But the lower half is where a big part of the improvement happened in 2025 because of the lower mortgage rates. As you move lower in price, you're more dependent on rates to purchase. And we've seen a disproportionate increase after sort of being, I don't want to say asleep, but sort of, not really a lot of, activity.
Lower mortgage rates also bring more sellers to the market.
Yes.
So maybe this year, if the projection is that rates may cool off a little bit more, possibly, it may open up our inventory, which will help the market. Because more inventory brings more buyers, which increases sales. Do you agree with that idea?
I absolutely do. I think, the lock-in effect, which started coming out of the pandemic, where if someone bought with a 3% mortgage and the prevailing rate at the time was 7%, they see that as an asset and they're going to hunker down and they're not going to put their house on the market because the mortgage rate bridge between the two is very wide. That's been shrinking. And also, my silly example is always, a couple owns a condo. one bedroom condo and they have triplets, how long, if they can afford it,
Right.
are they going to sit, right? And the answer is, if it's already been 3.5 years,
People have been sitting for a long
they've been sitting
time.
for a while. And I think just the reduction in rates sort of, adds to that urgency that we should do something.
So, Gabrielle, how are you feeling about the rental market and how it's affecting the sale market?
Yeah, I'm seeing an incredibly busy rental market where prices just keep increasing. And, I'm putting listings on the market and we're raising the prices to record highs, prices that these listings haven't achieved before. And we're getting full asking price offers the same day we're listing it on the market. So it's really a robust rental market. And I think just the inventory levels in the sales market have a lot to do with people being pushed out of the market for purchase and into the rental market.
Well, that's exactly what I'm seeing in the research that we're doing. So, for example, the top line rental number, we use median sale price as sort of our anchor price, and the median price for December was the highest in history, or second highest in history.
Wow.
Wow.
And normally we don't see price records in a December, and they were the second highest in history,
Yeah.
only by like $30. Like it's just sort of nipping at the record. And 2025, 80% of the year was at record prices.
Yeah.
So it's been in fact, records started in early 25 every month and continued through the end of the year. And I don't see that changing.
Mm-hmm.
But what's really interesting is you have a purchase market that's seeing more sales, higher prices, and you're seeing a rental market that's seeing more leasing and higher prices, right? So how's that possible? You usually see them sort of go in opposite directions, not necessarily, when one goes up, one goes down, but the trend is, when people are priced out of the purchase market, like you said,
Right.
they rent, or they're uncomfortable with the purchase market, they rent. But then, the rental market suffers when mortgage rates go down because but mortgage rates have been going down, and both markets are still ascending. And my unproved theory on why both are escalating in tandem
Mm-hmm.
is because I think there's more inbound migration into the city than we had seen in the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
I can't prove that. That's a little beyond my pay grade. But in terms of what my observation is, how can both improve like that at the same time? And that tells me perhaps we have some inbound migration that is enhancing that.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you just from experience that we're getting a lot of people moving into the city from other states, from other parts of the country.
Interesting.
I think a lot of it has to do with the work from home flexibility that most people have with their
Right.
jobs. So if they can live anywhere and work from anywhere, why not New York? New York
Right.
is a fun playground to have a life.
When I was growing up, I'm not a New York native. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. metro area. And my grandfather, who lived in Connecticut, my parents grew up in Connecticut. My grandfather always, as a kid, told me, Jonathan, if you're not working in New York, then you're just camping out.
Oh, wow.
And then somehow I ended up in New York. So
I love that.
I read some statistics that repopulation of New York is kind of exceeding pre-pandemic levels as far as the population of office workers coming back to work in Manhattan. So
yes,
the discomfort of living in remote areas is, I think, bearing down on them, and they're coming back to the city.
Yeah, I think the sentiment 5 years ago was people are fleeing the city, they're never coming back, and I don't work for the tourist board, but I take issue with sort of with the new mayor coming in, it was like the city, that's it, and there's no evidence of it because the housing data, even new contract data, sales, prices, rents, leasing activity are all showing growth. And if someone was fleeing the city, then they wouldn't be getting record prices.
Mhm.
They're cut and run,
Mhm.
and prices wouldn't be rising.
Yeah,
It,
I mean, that week immediately after the announcement of the mayor election, it was like the busiest week we've had all year.
right.
And so, to your point, I think there's a lot of buzz, especially in the major news outlets, that people in other parts of the country that are not living in New York are saying, oh, New York is ruined. No one's going to want to live in New York
Right.
anymore. And we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing people coming in and they're renting, and we have bidding wars on like almost all of our listings.
Yeah.
So yeah, those stories are just not
Well,
lining
I
up
know
for
in the
us.
rental market, I believe it's 1 in 5 rentals are listing above the landlord's asking price.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a record, but that is elevated, and it's been in the 20s and 20%, 1 in 5, for several years. We did in 2015. We had a couple of a month, a 3 or 4 month period where the bidding wars were over 30%.
Wow.
But generally, one out of 5 is a big number, and that's telling you, how tight the market
Yeah,
is.
and I'm sure that there are segments of the market that will be more affected by the mayoral election. So maybe like the ultra luxury. And do you have any
We're not seeing
indication
any
on
of
that
that.
yet?
In
Yeah,
fact, across the board by price point, we're
interesting.
not seeing anything. So, I always like to say the plural of anecdotal is not data. You've heard
Mm.
me say that
Mhm.
before. And so when one person gives an example, that becomes a fact. And
Mm-hmm.
then two people have the conversation, they each have a story, but that's still not data.
Mm-hmm.
That's, when we're talking of hundreds or thousands of transactions and market behavior, that's not what we're seeing.
Mhm.
Now, it doesn't mean we won't see that in the future. Who knows? But there's no evidence for any of that type of conversation
Right.
right now, which, is sort of consistent with New York and any kind of adversity, 9/11 or other events in the past. The market always seems to rebound.
It's like resilient.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's something to that we don't fully understand.
Always bet on New York.
Right.
No, it's a very interesting thing regarding the Mamdani effect. There was a lot of conversations I think about what the mayor's influence could have. 34-year-old mayor, controlling a city budget of roughly 116 billion dollars. I mean, it's an incredible responsibility for such a young, and very bright and talented, mayor. It feels like the pattern of last year followed what you characterize as a textbook election year, where the transactions slow down as you're nearing the election,
And then a release.
and then the release.
And it doesn't matter the outcome of the election. It's just a layer of uncertainty that once the uncertainty goes away, it's a fact. Then people just go on with their business.
Back to the normal,
right?
Right. No, but I think what's interesting is what I'm hearing is the issues that were his platform to get elected for this year is causing some fear and some buyers that are or sellers for 2026. I know it's too early to tell at this point, but like, what's your take on?
Well, I think the first thing to do is just be very cognizant of how the housing market is performing.
Mm-hmm.
So
look at the data.
Right. Yeah. So a friend of mine calls it evidence-based research, which I always can't say that without sarcasm. But think about it in the context of someone who, we have a strong high-end housing market. Mm-hmm. So someone's paying 10, 15, 20, 25 million. If there was any doubt, then they wouldn't be buying today. Mm-hmm. There's too many other reasons to be here. Mm-hmm. So I was very outspoken during this whole election cycle because he was not a household name until the first week of July.
Yes.
Which is when mortgage rates started to drift lower, actually. And and we had a robust third quarter and a very active rental market ever since. So so anyway, I just call me skeptical that there's anything to that effect.
So if you had some advice for our viewers, if they're thinking of buying or selling this year, what would you give them for your best advice?
So I'm pretty weak on advice. I just think there's a lot of transparency, more than there ever has. 20 years ago, it's night and day, right? I feel like that's becoming a constant that everybody has that access. I think it's about working with an agent that you trust, a trusted advisor, because um, I think that's probably the most important role that an agent has today. And it's not about an agent telling you what to do. It's sort of laying it out for you and making your own decision and feeling comfortable. And I feel like that gets lost in the shuffle of all the stats. And I'm a stat person,
Yeah.
or as I like to say, a dull and boring numbers guy. But I think that's the way to think of it, is that it's not something to go through on your own, is the way, at least that was the attitude I took every time we've bought and sold a house.
It's so true. Because what I'm seeing in the market doesn't match what I'm reading in the media, exactly as you described it.
I would almost say that there's a bigger disconnect between the macro story and what's happening on the ground right now, more than I've seen. I don't know if it's the most in history, but it's certainly a wide chasm, and so I need a filter to be able to sort of think through that, and to be better informed.
So eloquently put, Jonathan. It's such a pleasure to speak to you. I always get so much more intelligent just sitting and listening to you speak. So thank you so much.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
And that concludes our market discussion. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked what you saw today, feel free to hit a like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section, and we'll be happy to respond. Thank you so much.